Effect.
What's up? Another episode of Ripple Effect Podcast. I'm your host, Ricardo Runs, also known as Ricky Brands, and a great episode for you today. Legendary journalist Vanessa Beeley. You guys might know her from all the interviews she's done throughout her career. She does stuff for MintPress News. She does stuff for Last American Vagabond. She's been on Corbett's show. She's been on so many of the shows that I'm sure you guys listen to, so I'm sure you're familiar with her work. She's also been on the Union of The Unwanted. We did a international edition, and she was one of the special guests on that episode, so definitely check that out if you haven't checked that out yet. I'll put links in the show description to all her pages and social media accounts and all that stuff. For a while, I was only doing it on the video version of the episode, so if you're watching the show on BitChute, YouTube, Odyssey, wherever you're watching the show, in the show description, I would have all the links. For some reason, the RSS feed, anytime I would put the links, it would work on one app, not on another app, and I would have issues. But I think I figured out a way of putting them. So now, 300th episode and forward, this is 301, so I did it on the last episode. You will see the links in the show description to my Patreon page, my merch store, which is the Ripple Effect Podcast, merch.com, and all the other things I put there, my Rockfin page, I believe, and also links to my guests' social media accounts or websites. So that will make it super easy. So if you're listening to the show on iTunes, Spotify, wherever you listen to the show, you can go in the show description and click that link. So it makes it super easy. Speaking of Patreon, I just did my 300th episode, and I saved my next Patreon podcast, which I call Ricky Rants with Fans, for my 300th episode. So what a Patreon podcast is I do a podcast and I share the Zoom link with all my Patreon supporters, and they get to join in on the podcast. So I did that on my last 300th episode, and then I also had a bunch of really special guests join us on the conversation, and one of them was my original co-host and my dear friend Dave. So that was fun to hear his take on how we started the show and some of the background and all that. And I also got tons of amazing emails and people writing me on social media, congratulating me, and everybody from fans to other podcasters and content creators who wanted to join us on the 300th episode and couldn't. So it was just awesome to just get all that love. I really, really appreciate it from everybody. So support me on Patreon. I have a merch store. Support me there if you want to represent Ripple Effect Podcast with some merch. It also helps support the show. I started my first solo show called Ricky Rants on Rockfin, which is an exclusive solo show just on Rockfin. You can go to rockfin.com/Ripple Effect and you can find that show. Check that out. I'm also on Fringe.fm, which is a 24/7 alternative media radio station. You can download the app on your phone, or you can go on the website, and Ripple Effect Podcast streams every Wednesday night, 6 to 9 p.m. Eastern Time. So check that out. I'm also sharing clips of older podcasts. So throughout the last couple of years, the show's really blown up quite a bit. So I think there's a lot of forgotten shows or shows that are undiscovered. Some of my earlier shows. So I'm cutting clips from that, sharing it on my social media accounts, and then hoping that you guys will find the clips interesting, go back and listen to some of those really good shows that I've done the first couple years of doing the podcast. So I think that's finally it. Enjoy the show, guys, and I will talk to you guys on the next one. Peace. Last time you were on, we talked about a lot of geopolitics, and what's going on, obviously very important issues. But I think journalism is such an interesting field because it's one of those fields where obviously most likely you didn't get into it for the purpose of pursuing money. You went into it because you really have
No, I'm in seriously the wrong job if I wanted to do it for money.
yeah, it's not a great career choice if you're pursuing
No.
profit. So I think the type of people that go into this type of field is, to me, is very interesting. And I kind of want to get a little bit of your background, because I mean, you've been on a lot of shows that I listen to, and I'm sure a lot of listeners listen to: Last American Vagabond, James Corbett, Fault Lines. I mean, you've been interviewed on a lot of these shows throughout the years, talking about obviously geopolitics and what's going on in the Middle East and all over the world. But I'd like to get know you and have the listeners get to know you as, like, what brought you here, what was this journey that brought you to wanting to pursue something that obviously isn't a very good career choice, like we said, in regards to money, but it's also dangerous and also requires 100% commitment, and dealing with backlash and all this stuff. So what did lead you here?
Oh God, that's a real $1 million question. um, oh, I mean, I guess like so many of us, it started as activism or, a passion for justice. And I guess I'd have to go back to my dad, which I always do. He was one of the foremost Arabists of his time, of his era. Just after the Second World War, for example, he was Middle East advisor to Ernest Bevin at a point where I believe historically Britain, there was a very small window of opportunity when there were people in government and people advising government, when they did actually try to turn back the tide of the Jewish settlements in Palestine. That window wasn't open for very long because, of course, many of them then were targeted by the Israeli terrorist Stern Gang. And there were various assassination attempts against members of the government who were peers of my father and friends and colleagues of my father, who were trying, as I say, to prevent the Truman Doctrine. And from then on, of course, the rest is history. But, I kind of grew up in this environment. I mean, when I was tiny, I was in Egypt when my father was there for the 67 war. And he was the only British peace envoy that Nasser would allow back into Egypt because he had such respect and trust for him. So I kind of grew up, even though I was typical rebellious foreign office brat, as some people describe me as. I didn't really follow my dad's work, but I think I absorbed it by osmosis. And when he died in 2001, I inherited, or I received, a lot of his confidential papers and diaries and photos and press clippings and so on. And I started to put the pieces together, and I was like, wow, my dad was a really cool guy, like literally. And then at this point, I was in the corporate hamster wheel. I was working for a big multinational in the UK. I was never really a career person, but I enjoyed my work, and I wasn't really thinking I want to go to the Middle East and, get myself involved in the issues there. But as I started to go through his papers and really start to piece together what had happened historically, I then went on a kind of personal journey. I wanted to go back to Egypt and visit the places that I'd been to when I was a kid, and to go and see the memorial that had been put there for my father and so on. And at that time, I then got involved with a group of activist journalists that were going to Gaza. So I thought, yeah, okay, cool. While I'm there, I'll go to Gaza and get involved there and go and see what the situation is like there. And the first few times We couldn't go through for various reasons. And then I think it was on the third attempt, we got to the Rafah crossing and we were turned back again by the Egyptian intelligence, which of course are effectively controlled by Zionist intelligence. And at this point we decided, okay, we're going to go through the tunnels. So we went through the tunnels into Gaza with the permission of Hamas. But of course, it's still a pretty risky procedure in the sense that if you get caught by the Egyptians, you would immediately be arrested. And then I think 2 days after we entered via the tunnels, Israel started bombing in 2012. So it was impossible to leave. Not that I would have wanted to leave anyway. And so we stayed through the bombing. That was when I actually met Eva Bartlett, another amazing journalist who's been covering Palestine and Syria and so on. And so basically it sort of, it snowballed from there. Through Eva, I joined the Syria Solidarity Movement, which at that time was still sort of not, still trying to figure out exactly what was going on inside Syria. But something that happened in Gaza in 2013, when Israel bombed Damascus in April 2013, I was in Gaza at this time. And I interviewed one of the senior spokespeople for Hamas. And I asked him what he thought of this attack. And he basically told me, well, it's normal because Syria has crossed, excuse me, the red line. They've crossed Israel's red line. They've been providing weapons to Hezbollah. And my jaw nearly hit the table. I mean, this was Hamas that were supported by Hezbollah and Iran in the beginning. And then, of course, Hamas were also responsible for a lot of the destabilization inside Syria. And this is something that the Palestinian movement is largely unaware of, the role that Hamas played actually as a part of the Muslim Brotherhood destabilization of Syria, which historically has existed. Of course, the US has previously used the Muslim Brotherhood back in the late 70s, early 80s to try and overthrow the government of Hafiz al-Assad. So basically that's how I got into it. And then I think the more you start to investigate and the more you realize the extent to which our governments are involved in inflicting such wholesale bloodshed and misery and devastation on sovereign nations, on the peoples of those nations. That's the most important thing. I always say, when you go into someone's home and you listen to the stories they have to tell you of what has really happened in these conflicts, you can't turn away. It's something you can't unsee. It's something you can't unhear. It's something that just leaves its mark on you forever. And so therefore you feel, or I feel, a responsibility to transmit those stories, a responsibility to say, hey, there is another side to this story, and it's a side which is not being told, and these people's voices are not being heard. They're effectively being disappeared by the media that is supposed to be giving you a balanced view. And it's not a balanced view. You're being sold the line that actually the terrorists are the good guys and the defenders of their country are the bad guys. And this is a completely immoral sort of reversal of truth. And this is unacceptable. If I was a person not involved in what I'm doing, I would want somebody to tell me the truth. So I don't lay claim to the truth. I lay claim to looking for the truth.
Yeah, it's funny. I say that quite often. I don't want anybody ever and if I ever have said it, I've misspoke where it's like, oh, we're trying to, fight back against propaganda. And sometimes when people say that, it almost sounds like I have the truth. Like, listen to me, because and it's like, it's always a journey. It's a never ending journey of discovering and trying to find truth. And then you find out that there's many different versions and shades of truth,
Mm.
because it's all perspective, right? Like
Yeah.
you said, it's like that quote, one person's freedom fighters, another person's terrorists. It's all based on where you're from and who you are and which country you're born in, or your experience in those conflicts. People can have justifications for things, and just like the US justifies or England justifies their interaction because of this reason or that reason, or you look at it historically. I mean, how many countries in Latin America did we get involved in their politics because of socialism? It's like, oh, we think socialism is bad, so we need to stop this. We need to stop what? A ism, a philosophy of how to govern a country.
Yeah.
It's so silly. And even now you still see you still see people use that term like it's some evil term, and it's like, it's just, it's not inherently evil. Just like capitalism, you can make the argument isn't inherently evil. It's run by people who are inherently evil, who will eventually use the system to their advantage. But yeah, I mean, exploring and discovering truth is really important, because you do need to hear other people's perspectives. You do need to hear like what they went through. And it reminds me of I had this journalist on some years ago, Mariana Van Zeller, and she's been on the Rogan's podcast actually just recently for a second time, but she was on my show some years ago. She's Portuguese, just like I am, and I remember talking, and she was on the Rogan podcast recently. And she was saying something that I think is so important. I think a lot of you journalists kind of experience, and she talks about how she had a recent show. I think it was called like Trafficked or something like that, and she would talk to like scammers or drug traffickers, and some people would get mad because they felt like she was humanizing these people, who were doing bad things, but they're fucking human. And humans, have stories, and sometimes the story that led them to this thing that you might think is bad might be a really sad story. And it might have been because they had a lack of options, or because they were raised, born into a country that had, conflict or violence or all these things. So to me, it's like, I think it is really important to get these personal stories, because it, behind these things are humans. And to figure out their experiences and what led them there. And I think inherently most people are probably good, and maybe because of trauma or because of some poor environment, maybe that's what took them down that road, and hearing those stories are important.
I agree to some extent, but what popped into my head was a recent tweet that the journalist Martin Smith just put out, where he's interviewed Jolani. And Jolani, is the head of Al-Qaeda, whatever brand you give it. He's the head of one of the most savagely extremist, sectarian, violent, brutal, elitist, racist groups on the planet. And I think there's a very thin line between having sympathy for people that have a cause and humanizing people that don't have a cause. They are mercenaries. They are there effectively. Yeah, you can pin some kind of Islamist, Caliphist ideology on them, but effectively they're mercenaries. This guy took millions, if not actually even more, out of Syria, payment, blood money, for the crimes that he committed against the Syrian people. And I think there is a very fine line between humanizing someone like that, which effectively dehumanizes the experiences of the Syrian people who were so hideously affected by these groups. I mean, some of the stories that you hear here in Syria are out of horror movies. The majority of people can't even hear it. You see them kind of almost going, no, I can't, I don't want to even hear that a human being can do that to a human being. And I think there's two things in this discussion that I think are really important. One, I think the job of the mainstream media is to keep the debate at a very reductionist level. So they keep it that Assad is bad, rebels good, And any other kind of discussion it's basically, if you try to discuss anything, you're an sadist, or you're paid by Russia, or you know, whatever else. You're a neo-Nazi, you're a fascist, you're an ist, something, right? And so the informed debate never informs, because you're constantly at this level of gladiatorial discussion. You can't, you know, this war is full of nuance. It's full of complexity. It's full of gray areas, but you never get to discuss those areas, because you're always fighting at this ridiculous kind of reductionist, simplistic level, where if you support Syrian sovereignty, you're an Assadist, right? If you support intervention, you're a terrorist supporter. And it never gets beyond that discussion level. It never goes any deeper. It never goes into, you know, why, if the mainstream media were to focus on international law, we'd be having a completely different discussion, right? Because if you focus on international law, then it's clear what is wrong and what is right. The issues that Syria has as a country is no different to the issues that you have in the US, or the issues that we have in the UK or in the EU, etc. Look at what Macron has been doing to his own civilians for 2 years. State-sanctioned violence and brutality. I mean, I've witnessed it. I went on a number of the Gilets jaunes, the yellow vest marches and protests in France when they started. And it's extraordinary. I haven't seen violence like that in any of the war zones that I've been in.
Wow.
You know, no, seriously. I mean, I've spent since 2016 a huge amount of time here in pretty heavy battles for liberation, military campaigns, and so on, attacks by terrorist groups, etc. Mortar attacks, rocket attack, missile attacks, cluster bomb attacks, etc. But I was a lot more scared in the Place de la République in Paris. I was a lot more scared of the French gendarmes there than I ever was here. So, you know, that's the thing. There is such a degradation of discourse now. You can't have a civilized discussion. It's impossible. And this way, the public remains uneducated. Because if, for example, they can see people on Twitter or on Facebook or on any of the social media platforms having a civilized debate, or if the BBC were to platform diverging views, for example, or CNN or any of the mainstream media were to actually allow diverging views onto their platforms without completely sort of attacking them the minute they come on, and shutting them down, if they actually allowed these views to be put across. Because at the end of the day, I'm only transmitting the voices of the Syrian people that I see here. You know, I'm not making stories up in my head and then telling you guys these stories. They're coming from the Syrian people. But it's the wrong Syrian people for the West, for the governments, for the UN, for the media. They don't want to hear from these Syrian people that support the Syrian government and the Syrian state and the Syrian army and the allies. And that's the majority of the Syrian people inside Syria.
Yeah, you know, I think one of the problems with foreign policy that, and I've said this on the show a lot lately, is when I first started doing the podcast, one thing that I was the most passionate about, one of the things was anti-war, just getting people informed with what was going on overseas and the lies that they constantly, you know, it's, I always say, like, how politics and the military industrial complex, they benefit from our lack of long-term memory, because it's like they trick us every couple of years. It's like, no, this time this is a just war, just believe us, this war's gonna be justified. And then after like a couple of years, we're like, oh, that was a waste of money, oops. And it's like the majority of people still get to live their lives. Like, they get to go out to eat with their friends, they get to wake up in the morning and bring their kid, well, they used to be able to bring their kids to school and do all the normal things. And so it was hard to get people upset and worked up about foreign policy because it didn't seem to have a direct effect on their personal lives. And that's why journalism was, to me, it was so important, because when you start putting faces, when you start seeing the images, like you said, you can't unsee that. You know, you can't. And one thing our media is so good at doing is simplifying things. You know, to us, like, we don't know the difference. I mean, we think that, you know, our conflict with Iran is just because we don't like Iran. You know, we don't know anything about the history of like the Saudis and Iran, and how, you know, obviously we're very friendly with the Saudis. The Saudis are bitter rivals with Iran. Maybe that's influencing some of our foreign policy. Like, we don't know any of these nuances. We don't know anything about World War I and how the Middle East was completely carved up after World War I, the Sykes-Picot Agreement, and how we created countries that weren't countries. We, you know, and that's why I think history is so important. And it seems like America, like, there's a huge issue with, and me being a foreigner myself, you know, I was born in Portugal. I came here when I was young. I have a lot of foreigner friends. I have friends from Estonia, from Lebanon, and I don't know, I've always just been attracted to other foreigners. And there's something about like coming from another country that it seems like they understand the world history much better. You know, in America, it's like you live in a box where they force feed you American history. You think the world started when America started. Like, there's no pre-American history. And I'm just like, you know, you go to, there's castles that are older than your country. Like, there's a lot of shit that happened before your country was the country, you know, and people aren't aware of it. Or I think it just shows the power of propaganda, the Edward Bernays being able to understand how to tug at our emotions, how to indirectly influence us. You get guys like, you know, Noam Chomsky, Manufacturing Consent, and this whole idea of, you know, how to convince people of things. I mean, and it doesn't take much. I mean, we regurgitate terms without ever analyzing what we're actually saying. Like, when for a while when we're saying moderate rebels, oh, we're only giving to the moderate rebels. I'm like, is there a survey? Like, how do you hook them up to a lie detector test? I mean, how do we keep using this term like it's legitimate? Like, like giving weapons to people that we don't know what their motives are or what they're going to end up doing with those weapons is a good idea. I mean, it's crazy.
Yeah, and I mean, you know, this is where the media comes in, of course, you know, and what's that saying? You know, the lie's gone twice around the world by the time the truth catches up. I'm paraphrasing, but it's true, you know, and it's a form of gaslighting. It's actually a continuous victim abuser relationship between the state and the public. And the media is one of the weapons that the state uses to gaslight the people, you know, and to change behavior, to influence perception, to influence bias. And as you rightly say, you know, the US is brought up on exceptionalist ideals. You know, I don't know how many times Obama used this phrase when he was president, you know, exceptionalism, exceptionalist country, et cetera, you know, it was really hammered home at the time, of course, that the CIA operation Timber Sycamore was running under his presidency, and training and equipping moderate rebels who, you know, when they receive the weapons, they're handing them over to ISIS and Al Qaeda. All right. You know, as you say, it's people forget history. You know, they forget the devastation in Iraq on the basis of the dodgy dossier of the weapons of mass destruction, or the lie of the incubator babies, or Libya under the lie of Benghazi, etc. You know, Syria is no different. In Syria, we have the chemical weapon narrative, which is falling apart real time. And yet somehow, because of course the media is not amplifying the truth or the evidence against the OPCW, and the evidence that shows the OPCW, the Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons, as being fraudulent and compromised and influenced by the interventionist powers within the UN Security Council, France, Britain, and the US, of course, that sit on the Security Council. the media, it circles its wagons around the propaganda and basically forms a firewall, and people don't really see beyond that unless they go looking for it. And this is another thing, that people have become lazy, they've become apathetic, you know, and they don't go looking for, they don't use their own rationale, they don't use their logical mind. This is part of the gaslighting, of course, because the whole purpose of gaslighting is to reduce your ability to judge a situation and to wait for someone to feed you their version of what the situation is. And it's been so effective, not only in the US, in the UK, in the EU. We're seeing it now with the whole COVID-19 thing, right? People are just frozen, and they're waiting for the media or for the government or for an institution or for a health organization or whatever to give them the information, instead of thinking, well, hold on, I know my own body, I know how I react, I know I have, you know, they're not taking that step back and thinking, but this doesn't make sense. It's like in Syria, you know, a thinking person would say, well, all right, but you know, Assad now has control of 85% of his country. Why is he not gassing everyone? You know? Like, why are people coming home and building their homes and rebuilding hospitals and rebuilding schools if he wanted to destroy them all?
Well, and
nobody's thinking like this.
yeah, I mean, the other thing too is, and then they use such ridiculous examples as, I know some people who don't like, you know, I don't like Syrians who don't like Assad. I'm like, oh, that's great. I know a lot of people in the
Yeah.
US who dislike this president, who dislike the left.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, does that mean that like that justifies invading our country? Like this idea that that's okay. And you know, and that's why when the, you know, the whole Trump election, when people were, and it's not just a Trump election, all the elections in the US, anytime there's even a hint of possibility that somebody could have had some influence on what was going on in our country and people are outraged, I'm like, we do that all the time, everywhere. I mean,
Yeah.
caught doing it. I mean, look at that Ukraine tape, you know, that came out, and it's like it was brushed under a rug. Like nobody talks about it. Like we literally had somebody from the US on tape talking about influencing the politics in Ukraine. How is this not important? How is this not discussed over and over again? How are we not like doing an investigation on like who's doing this, who's benefiting, why, and all these other things that should be? And it's because it doesn't, it does, the whole political illusion gets broken down when you talk about war, because they all agree on war. It doesn't matter if it's Obama, if it's, you know, if it was Clinton, Bush. Our foreign policy doesn't change that much, you know. And Trump, yeah, I mean, he didn't start any war, but he definitely didn't stop any either.
No, he didn't stop any. And you know, my belief is when I look at the timeline of when the elections happened and Clinton lost to Trump, I don't believe, you know, any elections actually are fair elections. You know, in the US, you don't have two parties. You just have two streams heading in the same direction, basically, right? In the UK now, we don't have an opposition. We have, you know, a shadow party that basically agrees with the main government. We don't have a Labour Party anymore. It's the same thing. And you're seeing it pretty much everywhere in aligned countries, aligned with US imperialism. Really, it doesn't make any difference who comes to power. They're still going to be following the same destructive roadmap, the same globalist roadmap. And when I look at the timing of the 2016 election, Russia had just come into the war in Syria at the behest of the Syrian government, right? So a legitimate ally invited to come to the aid of a struggling government that was being invaded from all sides by members of the US alliance. And so Russia came into the war in September 2015, and they turned the tide of the war. And at the time of the elections, Syria was starting to take back territory. It was starting to militarily win the war. So had Clinton come to power at that point, it would have been a very difficult time to increase the military intervention or to increase the military aggression against Syria because they were strong. So I believe that Trump came in to some extent, and you know, it's borne out by his policies as an economic battering ram for Syria, not only for Syria, of course, for the whole region. You know, he put Lebanon into economic freefall. Iraq was pretty much dismantled economically, even more so under Trump. And Syria, of course, he increased the economic sanctions in 2019 under the Caesar law, which is based on another fraudulent report put together by commissioned by Qatar, of course, who were funding Al-Qaeda in Syria, and commissioned by a British company. And so the sanctions combined with the COVID-19 lockdown, combined with the economic freefall in Lebanon, which effectively is Syria's only really friendly border. I mean, it's the exit route for most Syrians if they want to get out of Syria and to go to Europe or to go anywhere else via Beirut. The combination of that, of course, despite the military victory, this was almost more damaging than the military aggression. You know, economic aggression is far more insidious, far more destructive, especially over 4 years, than military aggression, because it's almost like after the military victory, people then need to recover. And if you put down the economic, you double down on the economic aggression, of course they can't. They can't restore, they can't rebuild. We don't have, I mean, I say we because I'm living here. We don't have oil, we don't have electricity, we don't have heating oil, we don't have fuel for cars. Why? Because the US and its proxies in the Kurdish Contras, the Kurdish separatists, are occupying the Syrian oil fields. And almost on a weekly, but even a daily basis, America is basically transporting Syrian oil out of Syria via one of the crossings into northwestern Iraq, right? Not because America wants the oil or needs the oil, but to prevent the Syrian people from having the oil. And all of this is to put pressure on the Syrian state, of course, to try and provide bread, because of course, last year under Trump, the American occupation troops were dropping thermal balloons onto the wheat and barley crops in the northeast to destroy the agricultural resources of the Syrian people. The Kurdish Contras are, again, storing and stealing the wheat and barley and selling it into Iraq. One, it gives them revenue, it saves the US having to pay them. And two, it means, again, that the Syrian people are deprived. The people of Hasaka in the northeast haven't had water. 1 million people deprived of water by Turkey, right? But the Kurds then are also occupying their bread factories, their wheat and barley stores. So effectively, these people are being starved, right?
Yeah,
Routes out of Deir ez-Zor, out of the oil areas. So it was attacking the Syrian Arab army on those routes. But of course, that is also the main route for the oil convoys to come into Syria. So, you know, under Trump, no, he didn't start any military wars, but he sustained the existing military wars and he increased the economic pressure from every possible angle. So actually, he was more destructive, I would say, even than Obama. And now, of course, we have the Biden war party here, you know, on the back of that. Now Syria is in a weakened state. You see what I mean?
Well, I think that's such an important point, because we always think about, like, oh, if we're not bombing people, then we're not harming the country. And like you said, financially, the harm that we're doing in many cases could be debated. It's even worse. you know, because instead of just bombing one little area or one area, you're harming the whole country, you know. And to me, it's terrorism. I mean, it's how else do you put it? I mean, it's wild. I remember I had this guy Michael Suzanne on, and he was the UN whistleblower, a part of the oil for food scandal in Iraq. Yeah, and there was I'm sure you're aware of it. Yeah, they did a movie, very good movie if you guys want to watch it, called Backstabbing for Beginners. And then Michael also wrote a book on his story. But you know, after they basically demolished Iraq, people were profiting from their oil, you know, and that money was supposed to be going to helping the people. And we don't, you know, that's something that people have to understand. All this bullshit reasoning to why we support one country and we don't support another country. I always use Saudi Arabia as a perfect example, because it's like, if this is really about freedoms or rights of people, I mean, we're talking about one of our closest allies has Sharia law. I mean, is it really about human rights? Is it really about, you know, and then who are we to say that, like, because they're not living like us, that we need to save them from their way of life? There is a very underrated it wasn't supposed to be a debate, because they're friends and they like each other, but it kind of turned into a debate with Dan Carlin from Hardcore History, who's been on my show before some years ago, and then Sam Harris. And Sam Harris, very similar to Richard Dawkins and Christopher Hitchens, that I think their dislike of religion blinds them from seeing things as they are. And when Sam Harris and Dan Carlin had this podcast, they did like a swap cast where they both shared it on their own platforms. People can, I believe, can still find it. They Sam Harris was talking about like the Middle East and, you know, how we should save women from having to wear things on their faces and all this stuff. And Dan Carlin, knowing history, and I don't always agree with Dan Carlin, but I think when you get a historian who knows history as well as he does have interesting perspectives. And he was saying, he's like, well, who are we to say that we, you know, like they do want to live the way we live? You know, they might look at us as, you know, like, oh, our way of life is incorrect. So it's like this idea of like forcing your way of life on other people. It's just, it's crazy. It's completely just ignorant to other cultures and other people. I mean, it's like saying, you know, like forcing Muslims to eat pork. It's like, you're missing out on good food, you should eat pork. And it's like, no, it's a part of their culture. Like, we shouldn't have to force anybody's way of life onto somebody else's. So I think that's, to me, that debate was very important. But you can see the issue with, like, for example, I brought up Christopher Hitchens, because he was really a really interesting example, because I kind of liked some of the atheists when I was young, because I was raised as a Catholic and I was very rebellious, and I'm like, oh, you know, those religious people, they, you know, I have questions they don't want to answer, and things don't make logical sense, and so it's like they're just brainwashed. Then I'm like, I go to this atheist side, and I'm like, oh wait, like I thought we were supposed to be open-minded, and we're not supposed to be a cult, and they're a cult, and now I'm like, oh wait, now I'm in a cult. I'm just in a different cult, you know. And it's so it just, Christopher Hitchens, he wrote the book The Trials of Henry Kissinger, and there's a good documentary about it too. So he understood like war propaganda and all this stuff. But then when the Iraq thing happened and we wanted to invade Iraq, and so did the UK, he fell for it. He's like, yeah, all these crazy extremists, and I'm like, your hatred for religion has completely blinded you. And
this is it's a really interesting point, because the thing is that here, you know, our style of, or the Western style of governance just would not work. I mean, you're talking about a society, and although it's predominantly Muslim, of course, Syria is also home to probably the largest population of Christians, of Druze, of Alawite, of Shia, of Sunni. So it's a multicultural secular society. Everyone lives as neighbors, close together, etc. But it's a patriarchal society. You know, whether it's Christian, whether it's Druze, whether it's Muslim, whether it's Ismaili, You know, as I say, there are huge numbers of different faiths and sects here in Syria, all of whom prior to this war were living side by side. But all of them are patriarchal communities, right? And effectively, that is how they view President Assad. And, you know, believe me, I've spent a huge amount of time here. I mean, I've lived here now since October 2019. So I kind of do know what I'm talking about. And I can go to areas that are having issues. For example, they have issues with electricity, they have issues with water, they have, you know, all sorts of things. And I've interviewed people that are ranting about, why doesn't the government do this? Why don't they do this? Why don't they bring us? Why don't we? Why, right? But at the end of that venting, they all go, but God bless President Assad. Why? Because you have to see this as you would see a family here. The daughter or the son might fall out with their dad because he's too strict, or because, you know, or he imposes rules that they don't like, or whatever. But at the end of the day, if they're in trouble, where do they go? They go to their dad. And that's what society is like here. They can complain as much as they like, but they will all say to me, even if we're against the government, the red line is the president, right? Because that is their stability. That's their father figure. We don't kind of have that in the West. We sort of still look for somebody to lead us and to, as I say, to provide answers to us instead of looking for them ourselves. But society here is very different. And as you say, we can't impose our views on it. You know, what if we have a government that's atheist in the US and it basically wants to get rid of all religion, but at the same time, of course, imposing a backward medieval Dark Ages Islamist regime on Syria, because effectively that's what the US wants here. So this is the crazy hypocrisy of this, right? They want to effectively get rid of a government that doesn't agree with them and doesn't comply with their foreign policy, with their economic policy, with their globalist policy, etc. It's an enemy of their allies. It's an enemy of Saudi Arabia. It's an enemy of Israel, right? So it doesn't comply. It doesn't meet requirements. It's not fit for purpose. But effectively what they want to do is to get rid of a government that is, or was and is, reformist, progressive, very forward thinking. I mean, both the president and his wife were educated. She was born in the UK and brought up in the UK. He was educated in the UK. And we have to remember that prior to 2009, there was no criticism of President Assad. Why? Because they were effectively trying to bring him on board. If you go back to the communiques between the emails between Tony Blair and Bush, just after the Iraq invasion, right? They were talking about trying to foster a different relationship with Syria. And that's what they tried to do. They tried to court him. But when he wouldn't play ball, and when he favored the Russian-backed Iranian pipeline over the US-backed Qatari pipeline, and when he wouldn't give up on Hezbollah, he wouldn't kick Hezbollah out of Syria, because of course, Hezbollah grew out of the Palestinian refugees who fled when Israel drove them out in 1948. Assad refused to make them leave Syria, right? And he supported the Palestinian cause. He wouldn't relinquish the Palestinian cause. So he wouldn't meet their requirements. That's why this war happened, not because he's a bad guy, because he simply wouldn't do what they wanted. That's the bottom line, right? And you know, if you read,
he was a bad guy, they would not have any problem with him if he played ball.
No, exactly, because the worst human rights record on this planet has to be Saudi Arabia, right? But the US is supplying billions of weapons and military support to them to bomb Yemen into the Dark Ages, right? To carry out a genocide against Yemen. That's supported by the US, by the way, fully supported by the US and the UK alliance. and Israel, by the way, you know. But and the thing is, they want to get rid of Assad because he doesn't comply. And what they want to put in its place is, as I said, a medieval Dark Ages Muslim Brotherhood Islamist regime, because they'll go along. They'll do what the US wants. Or, of course, if that fails, they'll try to divide Syria into sectarian statelets. They'll partition. Because as you talked about post World War I, of course, that was Britain's forte, was to basically create bloodshed in the future, like India and Kashmir, like Balfour, etc., Sykes-Picot, right? Yeah. This is what they do. You know, Yemen, before the war started in March 2015, the Saudi project was to divide Yemen into, I think it was 6 or 7 statelets, isolating their enemies, of course, in Ansarullah, right? So this is always plan B. If you can't overthrow the government, let's carve up the country into sectarian states, which will be continuously in conflict with each other. So we destabilize it, we weaken it, and then we can do what we want anyway, which is exactly what's happening. The US is taking the oil.
Yeah, I call it the resource curse. It's
yeah.
Why are all the countries with all the most natural resources also the poorest countries? It's because other people from the outside are coming in and raping them of their resources. And you know, like you said, we never go to the Middle East or anywhere to stabilize things. We want things unstable because it always justifies our interaction. It justifies, it's like, oh, look, this country's a mess. Well, let's get involved. Let's put a base here. Let's put a base there. Let's put a, you know, it's wild. I mean, it's wild how much money we spend on defense. Well, it's funny we call it defense. For people who aren't aware, it used to be called the Department of War, because, and that's what it should still be called. Now it's called the Department of Defense. Who are we defending?
What are you defending?
Yeah, it's so wild. You know, I mean, Bernie Sanders, when he talks about some of his socialist ideas, and you know, people are always like, how are you going to pay for this? How are you going to pay for that? He said something that's so true. He's like, do we ever ask how we're going to pay for that war? And it's so true. Like, we spend billions of dollars and we overpay for stuff all the time. And this is taxpayers' money to go to conflicts in countries that most Americans couldn't find on a map, you know, and it's,
I mean, a prime example is, what is it, the 1.3 million that's just been given to the propaganda construct, the Al-Qaeda linked white helmets, to make PPE in Idlib for Al-Qaeda. Right? I mean, this is sheer insanity. This is only a small drop, but this is the insanity of it. So meanwhile, health services are struggling, apparently. You know, people don't have health insurance in the US, but hey, don't worry, we'll give 1.3 million to the white helmets, which will be pocketed by Al-Qaeda and probably by weapons, etc. But it doesn't matter, because the story is we're giving it to them to make PPE to protect people from corona. Let's not get into the whole corona thing, but I mean, you know, it's
but you know,
it's complete insanity.
Well, war is kind of related, because something that boggles my mind is how people would say things like, oh, how could all these countries be working together? How could we cause so many deaths knowingly? You know, like this idea that like we would use false information, or we would be okay with false information that could lead to deaths. I just want to shake people. I'm like, where the hell have you been? Have you looked at like every war we've ever been involved in? Like, they're okay with people dying. They're like, that's complete, like this idea, like that it just drives me nuts. It drives me nuts, because I think it's, you know, it's almost like ignorance is bliss. It's easier to believe and probably easier to wake up in the morning thinking that the countries and the things that happen in the world have some good purposes. And it's like, it's hard to believe that we're run by a bunch of lunatics who could care less about us, who could care less, you know, like this isn't you know, somebody said this on a YouTube comment once, and it stuck with me. That we were talking about the left-right paradigm and how people get caught up in the tribalism of the left-right thing, or and he's like, it's not left, or is it not red versus blue, it's them versus you, you know? And it's so true. Like this, it's like, it's not like, it's divide and conquer. They have us all fighting amongst ourselves because it makes it easier to control us, because we're focused on the wrong people. We're focused on that person because, you know, he likes Trump or doesn't like Trump, or likes Biden or doesn't like Biden, or wants to defund the police or doesn't. And it's like, at the end of the day, none of them give a shit about any of us. We should all be on the same team, you know? And,
Exactly.
yeah.
Because all these movements, you know, so many of them are created in order to do exactly this, to create divide. And, you know, we kind of fall for it. You know, you're against BLM, you're for BLM, you're against defunding the police, you're against defunding the police. Yeah, you're absolutely right. And, you know, get out of the left-right paradigm. We talked about this on the show the other day, right? You know, we shouldn't be looking at these kind of little prisms they want to put us in, right? The optic is much bigger, and the optic is them, right? Because they're controlling all of this. It's the same, exactly what has happened in Syria. You know, they've tried to turn various sectors of society against each other. It's kind of failed, to be honest, because Syria has such a history of multicultural society and secularism. It really failed. It's been tough, but it's failed. And of course, you have separatists within the Kurds and so on and so forth, and those are being exploited, yes, but they're a relatively small percentage. If the US left the northeast tomorrow, the Kurds would start talking to Damascus because they're in a huge minority, right? And the US knows that. That's why they're power multiplying them. But that's effectively what they're doing to us now. You know, the hybrid war, the multi-spectrum war is being waged against us. We're facing food shortages. We're facing economic pressures. Effectively, we're facing sanctions. We're facing draconian, disproportionate measures to deal with a virus that is leading to economic collapse. It's leading to child abuse. It's leading to depression and suicides. I mean, in London alone, in October 2020, the emergency services were dealing with 37 suicide attempts per day, right? We're dealing with mass homelessness, poverty, deprivation, child poverty, you know, and heading for this kind of hideous data colony AI future, which nobody wants, but nobody is waking up to the fact that that's where we're going. Because like you said, they don't understand that we are ruled by psychopaths. Where at best they're sociopaths, at worst they're psychopaths. And they've been killing people on this planet for decades, if not centuries, right? And you know, we have to start waking up to this without panic, because at the end of the day, we are the powerful. You know, we outnumber them hugely. They have the resources, but look, I look at Syria as a kind of success story. The fact that absolute non-entities like myself, and I'm sorry, Eva, we are non-entities. We're not backed by any huge conglomerate media organization, right? We do everything off our own back. But we've had enough of an influence that we're being attacked by the BBC, by the Guardian, by the Times, by Vice News, by governments, by the UN, right? I'm mentioned in Bellingcat's book. I'm really chuffed with that, you know? So it's proof, it's living proof. If there's one reason I do what I do, it's to show that an ordinary person can do something.
You can create a ripple. You can create.
Yeah, I'm nothing. I'm not, as they keep telling me, I'm not a qualified journalist, right? I don't have a degree in journalism. But you just need to believe that you can do something, and really you can do something, you know? And if everyone just empowered themselves to do something, write a blog, talk to people, start writing to your congressman, isn't it? I always think MP. You can do something, you can have an effect.
Well,
right?
I say that on the show all the time. There's a lot of us. What motivates us, like we said in the beginning of the show, it definitely isn't financial. Usually, a lot of these pursuits are awful financial decisions, but it is one of those things where it's like I don't know what type of impact I can make or how big it's going to be, but
Yeah,
I can look in the mirror knowing I tried. And in
exactly.
many cases, that impact, I mean, if you really attempt it and you're passionate, you're going to make a much bigger impact than you think. I mean, I named the podcast the Ripple Effect Podcast when I first started it because it was my way of trying to start my own ripple. It was my way of trying to do something. And
Yeah.
last night I just had my 300th episode, and it was just, it's like, well, the average podcast, I think they say, is like 7 episodes. And I started in 2013, and this podcast has become an example of that because
Yeah.
I know many other shows that started because of this show. So it's like, okay, I'm influencing them, and I'm influencing
Yeah,
them, and
exactly.
those people are going to influence other people and other
Yeah.
people. There could never be enough bloggers and podcasters and
Hmm.
journalists. Like, I know a lot of people are like, oh, there's already enough YouTubers or podcasters or bloggers. That's not true, because
No.
the more there are of these type of conversations, the better there is. And they might not run into my work or your work or somebody else, but they
Hmm.
might run into that blogger who just started and now is
Yeah.
making an impact. So I forget the quote, but it's like the second you think you can't do anything, you've already lost.
Yeah.
Every
Yeah.
great change in the world was caused by somebody who believed they could do something.
Yeah, exactly. Or, not even believe, I never expected to have an effect. But at the end of the day, you do what you believe in. I can sleep at night, because I try my best to present what is really going on, what is really happening, and to try and expose the dark underbelly of our governments, basically, and what they're really doing to destroy the planet, to destroy entire nations and peoples. And as you said, they've always done this historically. So why on earth do we believe they have, our best interests at heart? No, they don't, guys. They have their financial gain, their status gain, their power gain, their whatever other dark, horrible, nefarious activities they have that they get a kick out of, the Epstein connections and so on and so forth. These people are not nice, and we're only just scratching the surface of how unpleasant they really are. It's actually quite scary when you start to get into, part of my investigation in Syria is into the organ trafficking, the child abduction, the human trafficking streams, basically, and who's controlling them, who's benefiting from them, where, for example, the organs end up, how they're being used, how they're being sold, etc. It's not a nice area of human history. It's a very, very, very dark corner of the universe, and you don't have much protection in that because there is an involvement in it at every level, from police to army to government to justice to everything. There's nowhere to hide once you get into those kind of territories. And so I always remember, actually, he was my dad's mentor, Dag Hammarskjöld, who was the first Director General at the UN. And he was assassinated in '61 on a peace mission to the Congo. And if you read his book, it's called Markings. And I always remember, I can't quote it exactly, but he basically says, you don't choose the way chooses you, and your conscience means that you can't leave the way once it finds you, basically. And that's what it is. That's all it is. It's that simple. It's not, you don't go into it thinking, yeah, I'm going to change the world. I'm going to, no, your conscience leads you, and that's it. And as you say, it's a ripple effect. Because you follow your conscience, other people then have the courage to follow their own conscience. and to listen to their own inner voice, which is telling them there's something wrong. And if you can give them the reason why they think that's wrong, it's a start, right? Or you can give them the questions, which then they go, but of course, I didn't think of that, right? And often it's just logic. It's just being able to explain to them, no, but look, this is the situation. Why would this happen? Why would that happen? Why would this person, who stands to gain? That's one of the main questions I always ask. Who stands to gain from this narrative? And if people, you know, it is just about believing in your ability to judge situations. We've had that taken away from us, and we need to take that back, because once we take that back, then we're back in the driving seat. We're powerful again.
Yeah, that's so true. You know, people like us, and I'm sure a lot of people who podcast or blog or talk about these issues, if they stop doing it, they would feel like something's missing. They wouldn't feel right. Like you'd feel like you're just lost, you know, with no purpose. And I think that's a huge motivation for many of us. It's just you want to just do something and be able to kind of put your head on the pillow at the end of the night saying, at least I'm doing my part. I'm doing something. I don't know what type of impact I'm going to have, but at least I'm trying. And I think that should be everybody's goal, is this idea of trying to leave the world a little better than you received it. I think that also leads to other interesting conversations about people who have their heart in the right place, truly believe that they're doing God's work, or they're doing, you know, their protests are for good purposes, good reasons, and are misguided. And so I think that could be dangerous too. I think you really do have to dissect, like, what are you doing? Because I think even with a lot of the protests, I'm sure all over the world, both sides, even if those protests are being manipulated, there's people in the heart of it who truly believe that, you know, they're fighting for the right reason. They're on the right side of history. And they might be misled, they might be tricked, they might be, you know, whatever it may be. But, you know, even in America, you saw with the Black Lives Matter movement and the Trump protests. And it's like, I think on both sides, there are people who truly are passionate about trying to make things better. Now, where there's emotions, there's room for manipulation, because we can easily be controlled through our emotions. You saw after September 11th, people were, their emotions were peaking. They're at the, you know, the most high, and it's like, this is the perfect time to just tell them some BS, and they're just going to be so emotional, and they're going to be so caught up in just wanting to do something that we can trick them into the whole weapons of mass destruction bullshit, which you know, and that's the bothersome part of it, is when things like that happen, we just look back and kind of like shrug and say, oops, yeah, maybe we messed up, that's all. You know, it's like, well, many of us can say that, but the people in the military who have PTSD, lost limbs, lost loved ones, people in those foreign countries that lost loved ones and had their country torn apart, they can't just say, oops, we messed up, we'll do a better job analyzing things next time. They can't do that. You know, there's long-term effects. I know people who have PTSD that are they have alcoholism issues, they have in and out of prison, they can't keep a job, they you know, have nightmares, they on different drugs. I mean, these are people who will never be normal again. And for what reason? Because, you know, we use it because we said that there were, even though most of the hijackers were Saudi, and you know, another link to the Saudis, and we're just like, well, we can't go there, you know. And then we found out that money, the 28 pages, the redacted pages, you know, showed what many of us were saying, that there was some funding through Saudi and whatnot. So it's just, it boggles my mind, you know. It just, but I think because we're emotional creatures, like you were talking about, some of the fake the chemical attacks, all these things, I mean, what do they all capitalize on? Emotions. They try to get us emotional. You know, we can ignore,
absolutely.
you know, we can ignore what's going on in Syria, but like once we hear these poor stories about chemical attacks, and we see these images on TV, then but they don't show you the images like when the Bush administration, when they stopped showing us the caskets of the military coming back. You know, a lot of people are like, oh, it's because they want to be passionate to the families, maybe, or they didn't want you to realize what war actually looked like. And I think that's a big problem.
Well, and also, you know, that's one reason why Syria has been such a big proxy war, because they knew they couldn't commit to boots on the ground, although there are obviously boots on the ground in various areas of Syria, but a much smaller number. And the main fighting force are all proxy forces, whether it's ISIS, Al Qaeda, any other of the armed groups, or the Kurds, etc. Right? So they learned that from Iraq. Okay, right, we shouldn't really, you know, we shouldn't have an all-out war against Syria. Plus, you know, the chances were high that Russia would be involved, that Iran would be involved, that Hezbollah is involved, etc. So, but I think, you know, if there is one positive, and I always try to find the positives, that the war against Syria has done, is that largely the mainstream media lies have been exposed real time. You know, with Iraq, the weapons of mass destruction was really maintained throughout the devastation of Iraq, the whole shock and awe campaign. It was only really later revealed that we started to look back and go, oh, well, actually, yeah, we kind of destroyed the whole country, you know, depleted uranium. We sold our oil for nothing, actually, over a dodgy dossier, right? But in Syria, it's literally being exposed real time. Syria is opening people's eyes to the criminality of our governments, what they will do to achieve their aims, and effectively, you know, it's mass murder what has gone on here. And what I always say also, you know, when, as I said, I haven't really, you know, I don't often tell the stories that I hear, the more horrific stories, but what these terrorists are doing here is only a reflection of the people in power that are financing them and arming them and endorsing their crimes. So, you know, when they show a video of a baby at the UN having a hypodermic needle plunged into its heart while it's still alive, and the needle moved around like this, and Samantha Power is coming out in tears and saying, you know, that the monster Assad has gassed these babies when they were effectively killed on film. This was in Sarmin 2015, and the Swedish Doctors for Human Rights organization did a review of the actual footage that was used. It was shown at the UN to criminalize the Syrian government. So these people can watch a kid being killed, a baby being killed on film by the terrorists that they are supporting, and they can come out and still point the finger at the Syrian Arab army that is trying to defend its country against these monsters. So these are the people you're dealing with. These are the people who will describe monsters as angels, right? I mean, it's just, it's unbelievable. And people need to really understand this.
Do you think it's because it's something I've pondered on quite a bit too? It's like, do you think it's solely motivated by profits and power, or does some of them are they actually crazy enough to think that their decisions are for the greater good? Like they're the, you know, because I always say how like we in the US we make fun of the UK about like, oh, they still have a monarchy. Look how silly they are that they still call people kings and queens. And I'm like, well, you know, the elite in America also think that they're a class above us and that they're the only ones who are intelligent enough and are the ones who should be making these decisions because we're not capable of it, and they should be ruling over us. So just because we don't call them kings and queens, those elite families, they have the same type of psychology.
I don't know. I mean, that's a really interesting question. I remember I think it was around 2016. I was actually messaged by the former US ambassador to Syria, Robert Ford, and I had a series of conversations with him, which were very weird, actually. And at one point, he actually tried to kind of defend his actions supporting the death squads in Iraq, right? And I remember saying to him, "Don't come to me to wash your conscience," you know. But there was a real feeling of he needed to kind of confess, you know. And I think with many of these people, they probably go into whatever it is, into government, into think tanks, into whatever institution they go into with maybe good intentions. And then I think what happens is you do one thing. It's a bit like the whole Epstein blackmail club, right? You know, you do one thing, they've got you, right? And then it goes from there. And then the higher up the chain you go, the harder. You can't escape then you're stuck in it. And I think that is the case for many, not for the ones really in control, the ones that are really pulling the strings, but the minions, the ones that are the weapons, the ones that are the frontmen for the policies, right? I think they're trapped. Many of them are trapped. Many of them, of course, I believe, like Samantha Power, I don't believe she has a human bone in her body. I really don't. I mean, I think it was in Africa that she ran over the kid and the convoy kept going. I mean, this is not a woman. You know, anyone who could have watched that video and then still maintain the narrative and not question what the hell happened in that video is not humane. She might be human, but she's not humane. Right. But there are others, I think, that just get trapped into the system and then there's no way out. Because if they come out, one, their lives might be threatened, you know, like many of the whistleblowers, but they lose their status, they lose their, you know, they lose all of the advantages they have. They probably bought 3 or 4 houses and they're afraid they're going to lose the houses. The kids won't get educated. I mean, it's the same in the UK. Saudi Arabia pays a lot of the politicians in the UK. And those payments pay for the kids to go to Oxford University or Cambridge University. They're not gonna walk away from that, you know.
Yeah.
Corruption is rife everywhere in the world. And then they point the finger at a country like Syria in the middle of a 10-year war with economic sanctions, go, see, look, they're corrupt. Well, hi. Of course they're corrupt. There's a war economy going on here.
Well, it's same thing with the political assassinations. We look at other countries and we're like, hey, look, they they politically assassinate people. Oh my God, it's like,
Well, hang
do you
on,
know
Trump
about any of
politically
the
assassinated Soleimani last year. You know.
Yeah, and then you look at talked about Iraq, some of the inspectors from the UK that were
Yeah.
in Iraq, and inspecting some of the whistleblowers, the weapons of mass destruction inspectors. I mean, there's so many stories of this, but you're right. I mean, it's like, I mean, it's almost a reflection of how people are in general. Like, it's much easier to judge others than it is to judge ourselves. You know, it's like, oh, every time I try to hang out with this dude, he always blows me off, and then the second they want to hang out, you blow them off. You know, it's like,
yeah, exactly.
we never want to look in the mirror and kind of be honest with ourselves. So for people listening who want, because I after your last appearance, I had quite a few people hit me up about what's the best spot to keep up with your work and what you're doing. I know you're on Twitter, you have a Patreon page if they want to support you.
Yeah.
Let us know about those spots and any other spots that they can keep in touch.
Well, I'm kind of trying to spread myself out a bit more now because of the huge censorship that's coming in. I mean, I think I'm on a 7-day ban on Facebook at the moment, and I've had so many YouTube strikes. I'm just waiting for the last one, and blah blah blah. So I'm on Rockven. I'm writing at Unlimited Hangout for RT. UK column in the UK that does an amazing job, UK column news. My Patreon, my blog is The Wall Will Fall. And I'm kind of, I'll keep you updated, but yeah, I'm trying to kind of run a number of other sites, but I'm stretched a bit thin at the moment.
Well, there
Trying
might
to
be somebody
update them all.
there might be somebody who can help because
Mm,
so one thing I've done a really good job throughout these years doing 300 episodes is networking with people, and I've talked to people and I try to connect with people who can help each
that would
other
be
out.
amazing.
And so there's this guy Matt who
Mm,
he runs Content Safe, and so we did a Union of the Unwanted show because we've done a lot of the Union of Unwanted shows on censorship because that was kind of what sparked the
yeah.
whole idea. And we did one with a bunch of alternative media platforms. Jamie from Rockfin was on there.
Yeah.
I finally just started doing a solo show in Rockfin. I was kind of procrastinating doing it for a long
Yeah.
time, but I finally joined it. It just, you know what? I'm like, if I can help and support and promote
Yeah. Exactly.
you know, a place that has so many people I like yourself and Whitney
Mm,
Webb and Jason Burmis and so many Jimmy Dore, so many people that I've talked to and I like and I consider friends, then why not? But so this guy Matt kind of solved one of the problems I had because I was kind of you know, my show, 99% of people listen to it. So they'll listen to it on iTunes, Spotify, they'll download it.
mm,
And so the video part of it's like not really that important to me. Plus, it was a lot of work to jump around from like, okay,
yeah.
YouTube's gonna censor me eventually. So do I start uploading all my stuff to BitChute? Well, what if BitChute becomes one of those failure stories and
Yeah.
the next big thing's Odyssey or Float or whatever? So I'm
Um,
like, the only way to prevent that, because some people are on D Live, some people are they're all over the place. So I'm like, I'm like, do I have to upload on every website? I'm like, this takes forever. So he's actually a our mutual friend Richard Grove. I don't know if you know who Richard Grove is, from
mm,
Tragedy and Hope, and real great guy. He now has a new show
mm.
called Grand Theft World, and
Oh yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
and he's also just recently on Rockfin, and he's our mutual friend. And Richard told me about him, and Matt's like a friend of now become a friend of the show, and he was a fan of my show. He created software that can sync your work to all the places at once. So now I upload to YouTube, like this video will go up on YouTube, and within
Mm,
a day or two, it will automatically be on Odyssey, Float, BitChute, and I think that's everywhere. But I might be missing a spot. But it goes to all these locations, and all I have to do is upload to one spot. So if
that
it
would be
saves,
cool.
yeah, it saves me the trouble from having to go everywhere, and it makes this stuff almost impossible to censor, because if you censor me on
Mm,
YouTube, you can still find it on Odyssey. If you censor me on
mm.
Odyssey, which I don't think is going to happen because Jeremy's a real cool guy. But if any, or if they get attacked, you know, if they
Yeah.
get
Yeah.
attacked and they get shut down like Parlor or whatever, then
Mm,
at least they'll be in another spot. So I think stuff like that's super important, and I think what he's doing is like almost revolutionary, because with audio, when we upload a podcast, so I use Podomatic, they're my like host website, and where I upload all my stuff, and they're the ones who send the audio to all the other platforms. So I upload it to one spot, and then they send it. It'll be on Spotify, it'll be on iTunes, it'll be on every podcast app that's available. So I don't have to individually put it in all the spots.
mm.
But there was no thing like that for video. So now he's kind of solved that, and he's a big fan of alternative media. He's probably a big fan of yours because he's you know, he likes and listens to all the same shows I listen to. So one of his motivations is not just to like come up with cool new technology, but it is cool new technology that protects alternative media and journalists,
That's really cool.
researchers.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I'll have to connect you with him and see if he.
Yeah, that would be great. Because I mean, I just tear my hair out because Rockfin, I haven't managed to upload anything there for a few weeks. Because, one, I'm in Syria, so electricity is shit. Then I'm running whenever there's something like an Israeli attack or whatever, I'm going there. So that's 1-2 days while I'm doing the report and going there and interviewing and so on, and then trying to kind of update all the websites, patrons. And I'm like, oh my God, the BBC has minions to do all of this. They don't have to do anything. The top reporters just come and then everything gets edited and but a lot of people don't realize the amount of work that goes into what we do actually and what we produce, you know.
So for people listening, obviously you do have a show on Rockfin. So if people are on
Mm.
Rockfin already, and many of my listeners are, they go there, look up Vanessa Beeley, go subscribe to her channel and her content. Do you still do work with MintPress News?
Not so much as before because they've changed into a kind of different format, but I'm effectively their correspondent in Syria. So I'm available if they need to do any podcasts and so on. So yeah, I'm still connected to them.
Awesome. Yeah. Well, give me send me links when you get a chance. Obviously,
Yeah, sure.
and just give me links to all the places people can support you and keep up with you. And I'll put all that stuff in the show descriptions to make it easy. I know people are lazy; they don't want to type in URLs. They just want to click on something that takes them there.
Yeah.
So I'll put all that stuff in the show description, and people can connect with you and keep up with your work, and hopefully support you, because that's the other thing. Like, so many people who benefit from content like this, they don't support, like 1%, maybe much less than that.
Yeah.
Support
Yeah, it's a small percentage.
Yeah.
And $1 a month, I mean, anything, it's not, it doesn't need to be a big amount.
Yeah. I mean, you don't have to contribute a lot. I mean, even $1, it doesn't seem like it's worth your time to even contribute $1. But if everybody contribute $1, or even a small percentage of the people contribute $1, that adds up, and you can support somebody. And if you like people's work, support them, because then they can do more of it.
Yeah,
so
exactly, and better quality work as well.
Awesome. But thank you so much, Vanessa.
Oh no, thank you. I really enjoyed it.
Same here. We'll have to keep in touch. I'm so glad that I don't even know how I got your email and how we got in contact. But you're somebody that I would hear from time to time on all the shows, and I'd keep up with your work. And I'm just like, how do I get a hold of this lady? I'm like, I can't find her information anywhere, because you don't have a dedicated website, right?
No,
You're kind of all over the place. Yeah.
I know. I need to. I mean, I have the blog I use, the Wool Fool, but it's not noticeably my blog, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
The Patreon is. It was probably Whitney that put you in touch, actually, I think, because at one stage I know she contacted a load of people when the BBC were getting ready to attack again. She contacted a load of people. Bless her.
Yeah, she's
so, no. Yeah, I know, she's incredible. I don't know how she does it.
I don't know how she remembers so much of it.
No, me neither.
I say she's like the female James Corbett. Like, it's like anytime you talk to him, it's like information overload. You're like,
yeah,
I re-listen to this and just take in all this information.
Yeah, totally.
Two of the most likable people ever, too. They're just
exactly. Exactly. No, she's amazing. I love working with her, and we've collaborated on a number of articles, and actually, I really enjoy working with her, because we work in the same way. The way we research and even the way we write it up. If you read one of our articles, I always say I can't even remember which bit I wrote and which bit Whitney wrote. She's amazing. I really love her. I'm really sort of, that's the thing, doing what we do. We when you cut the ties and actually really commit yourself to this, you meet some amazing people, and that's the lifesaver, really.
It is. It creating this community, and that's why I love connecting people, because it's like we can all help each other, and we're none of us are competing with one another. We're helping each other, and if we can help each other, it only benefits all of us. We all benefit from this work. So, but yeah, it's when you get a chance, no rush, because I probably, by the time I edit it and this stuff, I probably won't get it up for another day or two. So whenever you get a chance, send me the links to whatever you want me to put in a show description. And yeah, a website wouldn't be a bad idea either. Just one spot where you could have links to all your.
I know. I do need to.
Yeah, but it's one of those things where just like you want to focus on your craft and the journalism aspect of it. That stuff is like, it just seems like a chore, so.
Yeah, it is. And also I'm a complete technophobe, Anyway, thank you so much, Ricky. I really enjoyed it. Really nice
talking to you. I'm sure we'll talk again in the near future.
Yeah, I hope so.
Thanks.
Anyway, take care.
Good night. Take care.
Bye.